Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for joining us today, both online and here in the Resilience Hub in Glasgow at COP26, for a really important session on the importance of locally led solutions for disaster risk reduction and anticipatory action. My name's Becky Murphy, and I'm representing both GNDR, that's the global network of civil society organisations for disaster reduction, as their European board member. And I'm also representing ActionAid UK as their head of humanitarian research and programme policy. And I'll be moderating today's session. So a warm welcome from GNDR, who are hosting this session today. GNDR is the largest network of civil society organisations working on disaster risk reduction. We have over 1,655 members across 129 countries, and are delighted to be here today talking about some of the experience our members have had in really showcasing local level solutions to climate change, adaptation and disaster risk reduction. So, today's session will be set up as a Q&A style. We'll have 2 rounds of pre-prepared questions for our panelists. In the middle, we'll break for any questions from the room, hopefully some questions online as well. We'll then go back into a second session of Q&A questions, and if there's time, end from a few more reflections from the room. So before we start, I would like to give a massive thanks to our panelists for being here today with us. And let me just give you a quick introduction to who we have. So first of all, we have Dr. Asha Mohammed here. Asha is the Secretary General of the Kenyan Red Cross. She has over 25 years diverse experience working within humanitarian and government institutions. She's served in a number of different capacities within the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And before her role with the Red Cross, served in various capacities in the Ministry of Health in Kenya. Next, we have Mr. BJ Kumar here. BJ is GNDR's Executive Director. He has a long track record in humanitarian and development work, particularly DRR. His expertise is in leading and managing civil society organisations and networks, gained through hands-on experience working in Africa, Europe, South Asia and Southeast Asia. BJ is a strong advocate for shifting the power from the international system to community-led capacities, preparedness and response facilitated by local organisations. Next, online, hopefully, we have Mr. David Njuguna. David is a media trainer for BBC Media Action, where he works closely with remote radio stations, broadcasting to rural audiences across East Africa in order to improve their productions. His work supports farmers and fishermen on the front line of climate change and climate crises. Next, hopefully online, we have Mr. Fai Kassain. He's having a few internet issues, so we're hoping he can join us. He's the co-founder of the youth development organisation Yodu, based in Cameroon, and a coordinator of an organisation called GLFX, that's Global Landscapes Forum. Next, we have Brigadier General Mami Narina here. Mami is the Executive Secretary of CPGU, that's the Prevention and Management Emergency Unit at the Prime Minister's Office in Madagascar. He is at the same time the National Coordinator of the implementation of the African Disaster Risk Financing financed by the African Development Bank. At the regional level, he's the president of the Regional Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation in the Indian Ocean Commission. And he recently participated in the emergency response to fight against malnutrition and food insecurity due to drought in southern Madagascar. We also have Dr. Saizan Tokar in the end. Saizan is the lead senior hydrometeorological hazard advisor and advisor of DRR at USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, the lead federal office responsible for coordinating the US government's response to international disasters. And last but by no means least, we have Dr. Zinta Zommers. Zinta is a humanitarian affairs officer with the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. She is a specialist in risk management and anticipatory action, climate change adaptation, and loss and damage. So, I'd just like to remind our panelists that you'll have about 3 minutes per question. My colleague Elise here will give you a little reminder when you're 30 seconds to go. And let's try to keep to time so we can have a bit of a Q&A from our audience as well. So, let's kick off. Our first question goes to Zinta first, and then David online. And the question is, what are some successful examples of anticipatory action that have led to increased resilience at the local level? How were communities involved in the action, and what made it particularly successful? So, over to you, Zinta.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Well, thank you for inviting us here today. There's a lot of learning, actually, since the last COP when we were all able to gather. In fact, there are over 60, maybe I'll take this off. There are over 60 anticipatory action pilots that have been designed or are in the process of being designed. So we certainly have a lot of learning. From OCHA's side, for example, since 2019, we've committed over $140 million towards anticipatory action pilots in 12 countries. And 6 of these have been finalized, and in fact, 3 have been triggered, offering opportunities for learning. And those 3 were Somalia, Ethiopia, and Bangladesh. And let me give you a case study or an example. In Bangladesh, which often suffers from flooding, on July 4th, 2020, we received a forecast that there would be flooding within 10 days by July the 18th. And we were within 4 hours able to release funding for communities to take action. And with that funding, WFP, FAO, UNFPA, the Red Cross, and 10 local NGOs took action, helping over 220,000 people with cash assistance, giving drums water storage drums to protect their valuables, seeds and fodder for their animals, and dignity kits for women, girls, and transgendered community members. And what we found in terms of the learning was that anticipatory action is faster. Clearly, activated funding was released in 4 hours. It's cheaper. The FAO was able to reach 10% more people, and we were able to initiate response. Overall, the SURF response was half the cost of previous actions. And more importantly, perhaps, it's more dignified. The communities, 90% of the individuals surveyed afterwards said that they thought the assistance was received on time, and they were able to take action, make their own choices for how they wanted to respond. We also found that we have better targeting. So with the time that we have to develop these programs, because they're done in advance, we can consult with community members when you're asking about local involvement. So they choose their actions. They even can choose which individuals receive aid and assistance. And we found from our targeting and M&E afterwards that the individuals had better coping strategies. They were less likely to reach out for loans. After 10 weeks, they were more likely to have increased food consumption, and overall, they were able to bounce back to their farming activities and were happier with where they were after the floods. So those are some brief examples, but just to say that certainly it's a way to involve the community, and we've proven that there are many benefits to this type of action.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And the same question over to David online, if he is connected.
For us, what I'd call a success for our project, we were funded by the Met Office, and the back funder was UK Aid, and we were funded to do a project called Weatherwise, which was providing farmers, fishermen, and pastoralists with information that would help them make decisions, weather information that would help them make decisions. And so what happened is we would co-produce, we trained journalists to co-produce information with scientists. And once they produce this information, we would then, the scientists and the journalist would then work together to produce information that the journalists would broadcast on their radio stations. And once they broadcasted the information on their radio stations, we found out that farmers, fishermen, and pastoralists were able to use this information because it was timely, it was relevant, and it was practical. And so when we did our formative research before the beginning of the project, we found out that people did not trust weather information, primarily because they found it too technical and unreliable. And so when we started joining both the journalists and the scientists to be able to understand how prediction is done, how the scientists come up with weather forecasts, and for the journalists to be able to understand that and explain the science of probabilities to their audiences, then we found out that our audiences began to trust this information better, and they started relying on this information to make decisions. So we found that farmers would depend on something like the seasonal forecast to be able to plan when to farm, when to plant, what to plant. And then we found out that fishermen would use this weather information to determine if they should go to the, if they should go out fishing, how strong the winds were, because fishermen usually use, daily forecast more, while farmers depend more on the seasonal forecast. Another thing we saw is that pastoralists were able to use this information to decide when to go out with their animals, because pastoralists, or herders as many people would call them, usually travel from one place to another, determining, depending on the weather forecast. And so once they are able to listen to these programs on the radio stations, and the radio stations were the local radio stations speaking in the local language. And one of our key key agenda for linking the journalists and the scientists was to break down this scientific terms so that audiences would understand it better and they would use it practically for their day-to-day decisions. Yeah. So I think that was one of our successes for the project that was called Weatherwise that we were implementing here in Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania.
Great, thank you so much, David. So our second question, which will be firstly for Phi online, if connection allows. Yes, I'm getting a nod. And secondly to Asha. Can local leadership in climate action be further strengthened by engaging the informal community groups? What role could entities such as youth-led and women-led groups play? So over to Phi first.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And I'm very grateful to be here. We are glad that we are part of this generation of new ideas and new ways of how we can solve climate crisis. I think actually in local communities, youth and women, they play a very, very important role when it comes to climate action. In low-income countries, most of the tree planting projects could not even succeed because those projects, the communities are not part of the planning, they are not part of the execution, or they only come in to plant trees. And when they plant trees and they move away, those trees end up not surviving. And that is what we see, that for leaders in communities, they have a great role to play. They should be involved from designing a project right down to execution. And when they're involved, they are part of it. Today, we no more talk of planting trees. We talk
I think we may have Yeah, we've lost Fi,
Of
unfortunately.
growing trees. And in growing trees, it means that when you plant it first year or second year, hello? When the tree survives after its second year, or in the next. Hello?
We can hear you. Please go ahead.
Yeah. When a tree is planted and is taken care of, that tree grows and it survives. You see, in rural areas, especially in Africa, women pass 5 of the 6 days in the farm. It means that if a woman plants a tree, she will take care of that tree. Men go to the farm only 3 times in a year, whereas a woman goes to the farm 5 times in a week. So she will take care of that tree, nurture it to grow. And when it grows, that's why today we're talking about nature-based solutions on how communities can try to mitigate. And we are building resilience. And if we are building resilience, we start from the youth. We are where we are because the other generation failed us. And if we change the mindset of youth that they should know what they have, the importance of what they have, they will be able to care for it. They will be able to preserve it for future generations. That is the problem that we're having actually now. And with the youth, we are sure that the future will be brighter, and then we can move mountains and then restore and recover what we've lost. That is, hello?
That's great. Thank you so much. And I'd now direct the same question over to Asha.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and maybe just to start, of course, by saying that communities are there before, during, and after the disasters. And I always say, even though I come from the Red Crescent movement, and we are known as responders to the disasters, communities themselves are the first responders. Because even before we get there, before any emergency service gets there, the communities themselves are already responding. They are already trying to take themselves away from whatever hazard may be coming their way. So I think it's important to always remember that they are there, they know actually what happens, and they know where it hurts most. And as the saying goes, that the wearer of the shoe knows where it pinches most. So I think it's important to acknowledge this from the beginning, that yes, there can never be any solution to this problem without the involvement and the participation of the communities themselves. We have seen various examples, including in Kenya, where communities have taken a lead to respond. They have taken a lead to ensure that communities are protected. But I think it's just to say that they need the support. It's only now that, of course, we are all talking about, yes, what's happening and what could get worse. But I want to imagine many years ago, it's not that we did not have incidents or events, but communities were able to cope and they were able to deal with them. But it's because now it overwhelms their capacity. It overwhelms their resources, and that's why it's coming out as, a global issue that we all have to deal with. So I think it's important to recognize that they have capacities, and maybe only what they need is for us to be able to support, boost this capacity, give them the necessary resources that they need. I think women, as a group that is disproportionately affected, is also in a good position to actually talk about what is the best solution. If I take Kenya today as an example, with the drought situation in the country, this is happening in areas where we have mostly pastoralists. So the men are moving away with the livestock, and they're leaving the women behind. So the women are the ones who are taking care of the family and the situation that is confronted. And they know what is needed, and they know what are the solutions that can actually help them. So I think it's good to put this into perspective and ensure then that support is given to these groups to be able to deal with this situation. Young people, I think we have seen a lot of examples have already been mentioned, how young people have come together, whether it's tree planting or otherwise, and I think the solutions are there. We've seen also that when communities respond, it is faster, it is low cost, because the amount of money many of us can talk about our organizations, the administrative costs, the logistical costs that we incur to be able to take some of these solutions on the ground can be avoided when we have built capacity of communities to respond. I'll just finish and give an example that in Kenya Red Cross, what we've done, we've worked with some communities to put together what we are calling community-based disaster risk reduction groups. And we've seen the effect this has had, that today as the Red Cross, we do not have to respond to as many incidences as we used to, because the communities are empowered, they have the knowledge and skills to be able to actually react and deal with some of it themselves. So I think it's really important to say that, yes, I think the only way we will win this is to ensure that communities are in the center and in the driving seat for the action. Thank you.
Brilliant, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So our third question goes to BJ, Mami, and then Sezen. And your question is, what is the role of governments in supporting locally led climate action? How can national government structures integrate knowledge and experience from the local level? And we'll start with you, BJ.
Can I just stand up? Thanks, Becky. Good afternoon, everybody sitting here. Good morning and good evening for all our friends from the online participants and the co-travelers with us in this particular journey. Let us first start with, it is the responsibility of the state that we know is to protect, respect and fulfill the rights of its citizens. That's the first thing. Now, if we go by this, if I address this question that Becky put to me, I will say there are three things that we need to do. Number one, can we ensure that the risk is analyzed from the perspective of the communities who are living that risk itself? Can we ensure that the risk is analyzed, prioritized, and plans are made by the communities? Second, we also do one more thing, that those plans that the community has come up with, can those plans be integrated in the local level implementation framework of the government, because government is responsible for it. Now, the way it is done in Kenya, that she gave the example, we are, as GNDR, we have made 550 plans in 38 countries. So those plans is what we are trying to integrate into the local level development processes so that it can be done. And that is where we see that, number one, risk must be analyzed from the perspective of the communities who are experiencing it. Number two, it is essential that the communities make the plan so that they can own it, they can implement it, they can monitor it, and make the state accountable. Number three is very simple. Go back to number one to start the process again if you have missed any of those two things. Fundamental thing is communities is the center of what we are talking of, and we want to change the life of those people. Then we need to ensure that those people are in the driving seat. Thank you very much.
Thanks, BJ. The same question over to you, Mami.
Thank you, Betty. As you know, that Madagascar is the big island in the ocean Indian, very vulnerable of the tropical cyclone, and with that is in part of north, but in the south we are vulnerable of the drought, and sometimes we have also with the cyclone the floods. So the government, in order to support the action for the community to adaptation and building resilience. So first, with your first point, with the communication, how to improve how to provide the support for the access to climate information with the wide dissemination. That's so the community can understand what is the risk in your society, and also can take in advance the anticipation measure and different measure with the different actors in Madagascar, NGOs, civil society, and also the partners. The second point is the maybe that we can give the small meteorological, meteorological equipment and also with the, what is that, the VSAT, the small very approachment terminal. The second point is the how to improve the coordination between the different actors. So we we established the multi-sectoral community for the disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. That is the second point. The third point is the government provides support for the organization of the simulation exercise each year, so that we support for the what is the measure need to take before the rain season and also before the cyclone season. So all actors take in charge with the community also. That give the what is that the good comportment before the disaster. The third point is the provide support for the identify previously the community for the shelter, but we need that to identify the big area. We can take the people vulnerable after the cyclone. This last point for Madagascar is the how to disseminate the building codes for the key infrastructure. Example for the traditional house that use the population, the food stock security, agriculture, small agricultural infrastructure, and water supply. That is the support that government give for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mami. And the same question over to Sezin.
Thank you. Can you hear me with my mask? Okay, I have to take this. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Communities, civil society, governments, private sector, and others are engines for climate change adaptation in a country. Achieving and sustaining climate adaptation and risk reduction depends on contribution of multiple actors and their interconnections. So building capacity of a single actor or single relations is not sufficient to achieve ambitious targets of climate change adaptation. Focus must be on the local system as a whole, not on individual components. As in AID, USAID, we define local systems as interconnected actors jointly produce an outcome, as the outcome can be climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, or resilience. Sustaining outcomes depend on the sustainability and flexibility of the local systems. And local systems can, and their adaptability to changing shocks and stresses and environment as well. So adaptation can vary from community to community in terms of process and goals, as well as subnational governments. As I mentioned, every component in this local system is critical, so is national governments. National governments play a critical role in implementing adaptation actions and disaster risk reduction, especially coordination those actions across the subnational governments and communities. Their responsibilities and contribution will include collecting information for common concerns and common good for all the communities and subnations, such as early warning systems, developing policies and legal framework enabling action at all levels, sometimes providing financing, enabling inclusive and participatory and protection of marginalized communities, and also facilitating actions and issues across subnational governments in a peacefully and equitable manner. So vertical linkages in that system as well as horizontal linkages are important to reach the overall goal. Again, failure of one actor or failure of one relationship will lead to the failure of entire system. So everybody's contribution and roles and responsibilities is important. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting. And I think what we're hearing really is that local leadership is not just the right thing to do, but also producing the most efficient, highest quality, most impactful interventions, policy and action. So that's really great to hear some of those stories and examples. Before we go to the second round of questions, I want to open up to questions from our audience to see if there are any reflections, any questions that you might want to pitch to our panelists. We'll start with the room and then we'll go to our online participants. So please do introduce yourself, who you are, the organization you're representing, and who you'd like to direct your question to.
Hi everyone, thank you very much for, is this working? Yes. Thank you very much for sharing your perspectives and thoughts. I'm Luis Eferino, I'm a professor of civil engineering at NYU, New York University, and I work on risk analysis, disaster risk analysis specifically. And I have a question for BA, right? So you mentioned that there is a need for community-based risk assessment. And I was wondering how this looks like in practice. What are the metrics that we, like scientists, researchers, should be looking at to focus beyond, I guess, what traditionally has been driven by insurance companies sometimes, that we focus too much on repair costs and economic losses, but we don't look beyond as much in academia. I was wondering what are your thoughts on that?
You want to take a few more? Yeah. Thanks, Professor. It's a brilliant question to ask. Let's say if I'm a woman living in Kenya, experiencing drought every year, I live that experience. I live that experience every day. And I not only live, I adapt and respond to that experience as well. So the point that we are trying to say, the community who is living that experience, they know how they analyze the risk, what the impact is, they know that, and how they respond to that, they know it. What has happened now, with the climate change happening, what my grandfather would have known when the rain is coming and when he would go for cultivating, that might not be predicted now. Perhaps that is changing. Perhaps what is necessary at this point of time, that to create that knowledge base, the scientific knowledge base, which need to interact with the community's own knowledge base, local knowledge base, where the local knowledge can then choose which are the analytical framework that they would like to use for primarily analyzing their own life and living, so that they can respond. That is what the fundamental principle is. There are multiple methodologies. We have been using what we call as views from the front line, where we actually did that. We do that in iteration. The latest one is happening now from 2019, and this is primarily capturing the analysis of the communities, and then trying to, they are identifying what are the risks and whether the climate action that is agreed in Paris was delivered or not, whether Sendai framework is delivered or not, and where the gaps are. So that analysis, they are actually bringing that, so that is currently informing the various policy discourse at the national, regional, and global level. So that's one methodology that we are using. But there are multiple methods which have many people, including the professors, academic institutions, have been using. Thanks.
Thanks very much. I think we had another question over here somewhere.
My name is Dr. Shafqat. I'm from SDPI, Pakistan. I would like to connect what Bijay has just said, the indigenous knowledge of the communities and the knowledge created by the scientists. I think I have feel in my work as well, there is a huge gap between that, because community does not really know how to, respond to the new knowledge. Even they do not understand how these things are coming up. So my question here is that how to club the indigenous knowledge with the national level commitments or frameworks, or how it can be translated into the community knowledge and localization. Thank you, Vijay.
I think it's perhaps the BBC Media Action, David is online, so perhaps he is the best person to communicate how they do that in real terms. What they do, they actually create the messages and take the scientists and their messages and communicate to the communities. That is delivered in various forms. That is delivered in art forms, posters, films, videos, these communications which are actually given to the community. And once community understand this, they capture it, then they actually analyze their own context and see this. So what is actually important to see that it is a traditional method that we have been communicating all the vaccines from ages, that we have been communicating national level vaccine programs have been communicated in various forms. Now is the question of the scientific knowledge need to be unpacked and need to be simplified in the local language, in the local communicable forms, and then actually can be delivered. So once that is delivered, it's easy for the community to actually understand it. Currently, unfortunately, we have delivered the messages which have not been necessarily risk informed. We deliver the message that fertilizer can increase your production. Now fertilizer has created a problem in Pakistan, for example. Yeah. Now if you see what communication has gone is not necessarily risk informed. What is actually more important to see how this risk informed scientifically valid and viable information is communicated with the community, and that conversation is informing the policy making institutions and the practices.
Just to add this important communication that in Madagascar that we use, you have many NGO and the society, so you applicate this different actor to translate the only the key message. That is the very important in this result of the evaluation and so on, and analysis of the risk. So they translate with the local language and the dialect from the area, and with the different partners like WFP or civil society to translate this message with the government authority. And that is the very important. We have the communication of the radio and television is little bit limited, so it's better with the actor in the field can translate the key message. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think keep that question in your mind, because we'll go into the second round, and David, who's online, will specifically be talking a bit more to that. I'd like to go quickly to our questions online. And Elise, my colleague, you've been keeping an eye on that. So over to you for the first online question.
Hi, sorry about that. We have a question for Zinta and perhaps maybe Asha's reflections as well. And this is from our online audience. What are the barriers we still need to overcome to make anticipatory action mainstreamed?
Great. I think that's also hitting upon a hot topic for the next discussion. Do you want me to answer that now, or should I wait and postpone that? Okay, we'll thank you for the question, and we'll postpone that for now.
Would you like to pick one more from online?
Another one, okay, for Asha perhaps. What are some of the recommendations you would give to INGOs and international actors who want to support this local leadership? What are the recommendations?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think some of the comments that have already been given by some of my colleagues here is important, and I think it's about working with the relevant structures because even communities don't work in a vacuum. And we know in every community there is a structure, apart from, of course, the usual government local authority structure. but also local actors, whether they are community-based organizations or groups, whether it is leadership of these communities. So I think it's important that we you can say we map who are those different interlocutors that we need to work with and ensure then that they're brought on the table. And maybe an opportunity to just say that I think on the question of communication, that's the same issue I would put on board to say we need all the relevant people in the picture, because it's not one to the other, but it's about all of us together. So I think even for NGOs, it's always important to understand what is existing, and so what is the most effective methodology to use to be able to actually take this on the ground. But I think it's also you can say a mindset shift that we have to have, that we are not going to talk to communities, we are going to talk with communities. So we bring the knowledge we have, but not forgetting they also have some knowledge, however little it might look, but it's going to be very critical in ensuring that that is integrated. So I think, yes, being conscious and cognizant of the structures that exist in any locality, I think is important.
Brilliant, and an important mind shift is needed. Great. I think we're going to go to our second round of questions for the panelists here. I saw a couple of more hands go up, and we've got a second round of questions from participants at the end of this round. So keep them in your mind, and we'll come to you. So, round two. This first question is for Asha and then for Zinta. How can locally led climate action, and anticipatory action in particular, be scaled up to move from a piloting phase to their full integration into institutional structures? And what are the barriers? So exactly as you said, similar to the question that came in. So over to you.
Thanks. I think some of this is also interconnected in a sense. But if I can try to be a bit provocative, I'll say stop piloting. I think we have too many pilots, and we have been piloting for so many years now. I think there's enough evidence of what works. So it's about taking stock of that, consolidating that, and then taking it to the next level. But also more importantly, I would say it's about creating the framework for this to happen. And that includes even at national level, and for our governments to actually be a bit more conscious about some of that contribution that's already happening and integrating that into national plans. So I think that's critical. But of course, resources, we cannot talk without bringing the question of resources, that to scale these pilots, it costs some cash. It also costs some expertise, because it's also not just financial resource, but it's also about the human resource that is needed to help scale this up. So I would say this is critical. And again, yes, let's stop piloting and just get on with it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Absolutely. And same question over to you, Zinta.
Great. Well, thank you. And we heartily endorse the mission to stop piloting. In fact, OCHA organized a high-level event in September where we had 135 member states and NGOs and civil society actors come together and say, how do we scale this up? We need at least 5 things, as was already touched on, but we need to strengthen the operational capacity on the ground so that local communities or NGO partners or agencies can actually design the frameworks for anticipatory action. That's one. The second thing we need is better early warning and forecasting. That was touched on by some of the questions here. We need to make sure that we have good forecasts that we can use in order to take action early and involve data collection and data from communities in that. The third area is, as was mentioned, financing. We need financing so we have the SURF, but that's not enough. You have the DREF by the Red Cross. We have some specific financing mechanisms for early action, but we need more for disaster risk reduction. We need other mechanisms that will, more money so that we can scale this up around the world from pilots to the national level. The fourth area that we need is capacity to then embed it into national governments into NAPs, for example, into disaster risk reduction frameworks. So to really then make sure that this is at the local level operationalized. And finally, while I think we know that this works, we also do need monitoring and evaluation to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can and to continue to improve and to continue to learn. And I think with those things, an investment in all those areas, if we each take a small chunk, we'll be able to get to that point where we're not piloting.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Very clear. So our next question goes to David, BJ and Phi. So how do we encourage an all-of-society approach to resilience and anticipatory action? How can different actors, such as the media, scientists, natural meteorological officers, work together effectively? BJ, to you first.
I will actually go back to the response that I was giving. That is also essential to see that the community in the current stage, with the change in the climate, with everything changing around them, they don't have all the information that they need today. So those information is required to be coming from the scientist, is to be required to be coming from other people who are also involved, so that there can be a conversation, so the community can actually understand why the changes that they're experiencing, why they're experiencing those changes, and how there are attempts in other part of the world where this is being addressed. So that is the reason it is essential that the community need to have an interaction with the scientific communities, the academics. That is what is one of the critical things. The second thing, let's say, as I already said, that for example, BBC Media Action, there are media groups who have been active, who have been extremely active to communicate with the communities, disaster affected communities. So that is a need for ensuring those skill sets so that the communication is actually reaching the communities who are going to consume it, who are going to use it. Third, the private sector. They are the critical movers. At the local level, they are the most critical movers. How we actually engage and capitalize on their expertise. That is where we strongly believe that the private sector can bring the technology, private sector can bring the information and also the knowledge which are used to address the similar issues in the various parts of the world. So that is why the private sector is an integral part. And fourth,
dear club delegates, we kindly remind you to wear your face mask over your mouth and nose at all times during your time at the conference, unless you're seated in a room with appropriate distance, while eating or drinking or are medically exempt. Thank you for your cooperation.
thank you very much for the encouraging words, and I will actually go back to my masks very soon. Yeah, the private sector. In addition to the private sector, that there is also need to see how we actually bring the other groups across the globe. How can we connect the various similar communities experiencing the similar things in Mexico, connecting with the Philippines, connecting with Indonesia, connecting with Kenya, how we connect them. So that is the other groups who can actually bring that. That is where INGOs can play a critical role. But all these things, somebody has to do this. Who is that somebody? In my understanding, that somebody is the local civil society organizations. They are designed to convene these groups at the local level so that they can ensure the local capacity is interacting with the rest of the capacity that we are actually talking about. Now, these local NGOs do that, but who pays for it? You need resources for that. The resources come from the government, resources come from the plants, and resources come from, at the global level, resources come from the various global agreements, including shifting the resources from G20 countries who holds the 86% of the resources globally and trying to see that is equitably used to make life better for everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, BJ. And over to David now online for the same question.
I think where we should begin is in the project design. You find that different, players will design projects, independently, and in the end, we find that we are doing we are duplicating roles. But if we could, at the project design, involve everyone, including the community, understand, and Asha said we should stop piloting, but I think we should also continue doing what is called pre-testing, where we come together and find out, sit with the community, sit with the people that we are targeting, and find out what are their needs, what are their information needs, what are their barriers, what are their motivators, who are their influencers. And once we are able to do that, then we can talk to different organizations and say, you handle the communication element, you handle the infrastructure. And then you find that what happens is that when we get funded for a certain duration, and things like social behavior change take time. And so when you get a project where you're trying to change a certain behavior, let's say you want the uptake of weather and climate information among, like pastoralists or fishermen and farmers like you are doing, you find that we would need, projects like those ones need time. But the time that, the donor is willing to fund is usually, maybe two years. And we are trying to change mindset and, behavior that has been there for ages. And so I think longer project timelines is key. And also, working together and mapping out who does what is also key in terms of changing this, having an impact within the community. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And now over to Fai for the same question online, if the connection is working.
Yes, I think I believe that there is always the absence, that umbilical cords between research work and the field. Because before we even got involved into growing trees, the issue was that we visited a community where they had water crisis. And we discovered that the traditional rulers gathered people, brought them to a stream, and it was pouring libation, asking on the gods to bring back water, whereas they don't even know what is climate change. They have been hearing about climate change. They don't even know its impact, but they're already vulnerable and are suffering from it. So actually, I think we should take research work into school milieu, where we have youths, putting it back, putting environmental education and climate change stuff into the school curriculum from pre-nursery right to universities. We will have change, because when people don't know what they have, they can never protect it. They can never care about it. And actually, today we have road shows on climate change. We have theaters, people are doing acts and all this. But the people that are really involved, that are vulnerable, as I said, they pass 5 days in a week in the farm. They don't listen to the radio. They don't read newspapers. They don't go on the internet. Those are the challenges that are in rural areas, that we have to face them. And how do we move to get to an old mother who goes to the farm? She doesn't listen to the radio. She doesn't even know how to use the internet. She doesn't even read the newspaper. How do we get to them? Getting to them is getting to community leaders. If we get to community leaders and we create that awareness, because actually now, sensitization remains one of the major tools, and schools remain the best vehicles to get into the communities. If research work can pass through school, what is taught in school is taken as a gospel truth back in the communities. If you tell a child, do this, the child will tell you that my teacher taught me in school that we are supposed to do this. I think if research work could move to school milieu, we will have created a very, very great impact.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Really important questions and challenges there of making sure that we're actually reaching the communities at the local level and all of them, and we're not leaving anyone behind. So I'm going to go to our last question before we open up for final questions to the audience. Our last question goes to Mami and then Sezin. So why is local leadership in climate adaptation and resilience building important? What can national and international actors do to further strengthen it? So over to you, Mami, first.
Thank you. Normally, the first action needs to continue. So how to, because the Madagascar has now the national strategy for climate change adaptation, also the different strategy for disaster risk reduction, and how to support the community to take part of the implementation of this strategy and action plan for this strategy for climate change adaptation. That is the first, and that we need the effective decentralization. So I think that one priority is how to support the local authority with the climate change and the information of climate change and disaster risk reduction also, building resilience. After that, when they have the capacity to manage his municipality or his local, so they can take part with the different project with the civil society and with the different project in the municipality. The other point is, of course, we need also to improve the capacity for the information dissemination about the climate change, climate resilience also, with the meteorological station and communication with different means. And or the money, the mobilization of resources is very important also. That is for the community, for the project that work there, for the actor, for the also for the authority, and of course the disaster risk financing. How to develop more and more the mechanism of resources, and also how to help the municipality to integrate the budget process for the climate change in his activity. The other point is the how to support the locality to identify the access finance for the in order that they can use the climate action directly with the community. And the last point is we cannot forget the capacity building with the developing country. We need every time and everywhere the capacity building, because the Madagascar is big. We cannot do one time. And the last strategy that we share with you, different partners, that in Madagascar we have many emergency response. So our new vision and strategy, we prefer to combine the humanitarian action with the resilience activities in order to avoid the problem, but now it is time to give the material than the fish every time. Fish every time. You need now give the material like nets and what is the something to take the fish. That is the new strategy that we need to applicate from now. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, thank you. And same question to Sezin.
Yeah, as Dr. Mohammed mentioned earlier, in humanitarian community, we don't see people affected by disaster as just victims. We see them as resource and change agents in the communities and the countries. So there's a lot of lessons learned from disaster risk reduction, working with communities and integrating local knowledge and experience can be translated definitely in the climate change adaptation. as you all well know, local communities and leadership know what works, what doesn't work in their communities and localities, as well as what they need from the external actors. So in implementing activities in USAID, we seek direct participation of communities. We seek their perspectives and trying to localize our actions in their context. Local leaders definitely understand way better than external actors coming into the community. And we try to reflect all the voices and provide a space for especially marginalized communities to have a voice heard in those program development, implementation, and design. I guess for the international actors, how we are doing, I can give a couple examples. We have been extremely busy last 10 days. We recently endorsed local-led adaptation principles to give voice to communities and local leaders to manage their own decisions that affect directly their lives. So we are trying to endorse this and raise awareness and advocacy on that. We recently released a draft climate strategy for external review. So please review and provide your feedbacks on the climate strategy. We're looking at broad feedbacks to make sure all the voices are heard. And in our strategy, we have specific embedded principles. One is local-led development. The others is equity and inclusive actions. So in local-led development, we are hoping that we can share basically locally led and locally owned actions are included in our design implementation again. And we also look into decision authorities, giving decision authorities local leadership for sustainability of our actions. In equitable and inclusive actions is central to our strategy, and we are trying to get context of diverse participation and diverse opinions and visions of communities to empower accessible and inclusive actions. Oops, time is up. Okay, one more initiative. I'm gonna stop after that. President Biden just announced a new initiative called Prepare, President's Emergency Planning, Adaptation, and Resilience, something in that order. And it's also looking to enable local-led adaptation, looking into IPs and local communities, and meaningful participation in their decision makings leading to adaptation decision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, yes, a big invitation for everyone to comment on the US strategy, which I'm sure we all will do. That's great. So we have quite a bit of time now to open up for some more questions from participants. So I think there are a few hands on this side of the room before. So if anyone has any questions, we may have...
Thank you so much. My name is Kosivia Desu. I'm working for GNDR. Mine is not a question, but I just want to make some comments, and if you allow me. My comments are related to the question we got from the scientists who want to know exactly how we value the local knowledge or the local metric. We have got a project some years ago called IFL, Action from the Frontline, where we try to approach the local community to understand exactly how they prevent hazard from becoming disaster. And I was surprised. I was in my country, in Togo, and I was surprised to hear that sometimes my grandfather, when he see a group of ants passing on a certain way, he can tell you what that means. When they see some bird living from, for example, the west to the east, they can tell you exactly what it means. And they can tell you, for example, in how many times it will rain, what can be the quantity, what are the risks. I think where we fail, where scientists fail, and allow me to be provocative, is that we do not go back to these people to really understand how we can interpret their knowledge. So my invitation is really to go back to these people, to listen to them, to take note, and as you as scientists, help them to interpret it. And to do this, I'm going to another topic, which is a nature-based solution. You know, we are talking about the disappearing of our biodiversity, including the animals and the vegetable. When our biodiversity will disappear, then all this local knowledge, all this indigenous knowledge will disappear because they are strongly connected with the environment, with the biodiversity. So by promoting a nature-based solution, I believe we can value the local knowledge that can contribute to improve the work of the scientists. Thank you.
Thanks, Adesu. Great. So we have one question here, then a question here, and then we've got a few online, so we'll try and get to everyone. We've got a bit of time. So maybe here first.
Thanks so much. Mine as well is not a question, but more recommendation. I do agree that we need really to stop piloting. And my question is, looking at the resilience hub, will that be possible then that we have a kind of a pool of tested solutions that is available for people and that they can pick from the hub, the solution, and implement them? I think that may be something that, in order to scale up as well, something that we need to put in place as playing the role of hub. So just a suggestion based on all of the discussion. Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. And yes, Zinta, please, if you have some reflections on that.
Yeah, just to quickly comment, I mean, that's a great idea, and a lot of the actors are getting organized, and we do have, for example, internally, many of the agencies that work on this, there's the Anticipatory Action Task Force, but there's actually, I encourage you all to go look at the Anticipation Hub, where they're trying to compile, at least for anticipatory action, all the different pilots, all the different types of actions, so that, yes, once we have these answers, we can just scale them as opposed to always reinventing the wheel. But yeah, just a plug for that, and to check that out. It's available online, and there are always kind of yearly discussion forums as well to engage with everybody broadly.
Brilliant, thank you. We had one question here.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Kate Crowley, and I work at the University of Edinburgh at the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. I'm interested in the idea that humanitarian funding dominates over disaster risk reduction funding and adaptation, and I think we're all disappointed with how much money is put towards adaptation. Is it time to move away from humanitarian? Should we actually be calling it resilience? And should we be flipping that 2% for disaster risk reduction out of humanitarian response to 98% for disaster risk reduction? Thank you.
Who would like to go first?
Well, thank you for that comment, because this is really, what we grapple with on a day-to-day basis. And that's why even for the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, it is a bit of a frustration that even when we speak of early warning, early action, and some of the work that needs to be done, we have seen in practice that even when we put out appeals or applications for that we have the science, we have the information that drought is coming and it's going to be this bad, and you appeal for support, you will not get it. Appeals can be as low as 0%. But the minute the drought happens and we see all the images we see on our TV stations, then the money comes. It starts to flow. So it's an issue that we all, I think, need to continue to advocate for. And I think the recognizing that we cannot also continue with humanitarian action without integrating the rest of the cycle is also not going to help. So what we've also done now within the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement is that even as we respond, we always have also a portion where we talk about the recovery and some of that, the actions that need to be done, so that it's a bit of an integrated approach. But I think the question then is, how many of the partners in the room here, especially those who fund, whether it's a humanitarian action or otherwise, are willing to change their structures, are willing to change their systems and merge these pots so that they can be accessed to have a more holistic response, I think, to the issues we are facing. Thank you.
Would anyone else from the panel? Yes, please.
What I can talk about what we are doing in USAID, I think about a year and a half ago, it's getting blurry with the COVID. We are reorganized. We joined two big offices of humanitarian arm of USAID. One is Office of U.S. Foreign Disaster Assistance, and the other was Food for Peace under Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance. So in Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, of course, our mandate is respond to when disaster happens, whether due to natural hazards or conflict, but we also have different components, what we call non-response. Disaster risk reduction is one of them, early recovery under that, as well as resilience. In the new strategy in USAID, adaptation goes across different bureaus. From humanitarian assistance, we go to conflict, we go Bureau for Resilience, and regional bureaus, and global health, and everything. So we are trying to look at adaptation more of a way of doing business within broader USAID mothership. Thank you.
Brilliant. And PJ, I think you wanted to remark.
Just quickly, two things that I just wanted to say. You are absolutely right. For us, there's a need to see how we shift our mind, or change our mindset. But having said this, let's be conscious that the impact of the climate change, the damage is already done. There is still need for a humanitarian response even today. Yeah. So that we need to think of that, because we cannot prevent everything. But having said this, we now have to shift our gear towards prevention, which is the DRR, which is a prevention and anticipation, is the investment that is where we should. But at the same time, let's not undermine, because there is still the communities who will be needing the humanitarian response today. Yeah? That's the first thing. And just wanted to respond to, perhaps reinterpret what Ades was talking about, my colleague. Let's say, perhaps there is no question of either or. It's not a local knowledge versus science. It is not that. Now it's the question of how you engage both in a conversation. And that conversation decision should not be left with the scientist only. The decision should be left with the people who are having the lived-in experience, but informed by what the science is saying. So that is what I just wanted to also clarify. Thanks.
Thanks, PJ. Did anyone else from the panel want to respond to that?
Normally, the disaster risk reduction that we combine many actions include the resilience building also. That's why, of course, we have two different sources of money from the disaster risk management and adaptation, climate adaptation, but we can combine in order to have the good result. That's why we have in Madagascar the program pilot for climate change PPCR, pilot program for climate resilience. So we combine the two. We made the study about the resilience. What is the how to improve the resilience, and also how also to reduce the impact of the climate hazard, because cyclone is from the climate change, flood also, and the drought. So that's area need to work together. That's why we have our director of the climate change adaptation here. We work together in order to have a good resultant and to have also our objective later, and to reduce as much as possible the impact of climate change. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Keeping an eye on time, I'm just going to go and see if we have any online questions.
Yes, there's well, two here from Chris Ball, who's from Diakonia Catastrophe Helfen. His question is directed at OCHA and USAID. You might have answered this already, but I'll just try and summarize. What are the main challenges in your existing systems which are needed to change to enable this anticipatory action? And are any of the actors on the panel seeking changes in finance mechanisms to allow the whole of society engagement in enabling locally led anticipatory action and response? So maybe I'll start with you, Zimta, just to reflect on your own systems. And then I've got another one for David online, which maybe takes us to a new topic.
Yeah, I mean, I'll quickly just answer and say, I mean, I articulated 5 areas that, we're working on in order to scale action. But certainly for us to scale action, there's a lot of changes that we need to make internally, both in the way that we allocate funding. So yes, additional funding is required. There is a movement amongst many donors. Almost 20% of disasters are predictable. So the question is, why isn't 20% of the funding allocated in advance? And there's increasingly movements to allocate a greater proportion of funding for anticipatory action. The German government, for example, has announced 5% of their funding will be allocated towards this area. So with that, we can then take action, but we need more of it so that we're not kind of going with the begging bowl in order to act before shocks. And that's something that we're really working on, as well as obviously how do we integrate this into our HRP and our own planning cycles so that we are minimizing risk before the actual shock.
Okay, thank you. The next question is for, I believe Fai is still online. It's coming around the comments you made about education and involving the youth in climate change and climate action. From your work, Fai, what has stopped you institutionalizing programs like that throughout all schools across the country, or what barriers are you facing to roll out your ideas in the national education system?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Actually, when we thought about this, what we did actually was that we decided that at our own level, we can encourage youth, engage them into how, because the main problem we identified first was water. We said it is easy for us to train these youths, engage them, let them know what they have so that we can be able to protect it. And we started with water. With water, we engage youth schools, and then youth that are in communities. And we don't plant trees, we grew trees with them. And when we are growing trees with them, each child plants a tree and take an engagement to care for that tree for a period of 1 year. Because when we are talking about nature-based solution, biodiversity is linked to everything that's around us and within, below the earth. So actually, what we are trying to do is we are gradually moving towards that idea of bringing back environmental education into the school milieu. And we are not only talking about green trees, we are also talking actually now about creating school gardens. Because school in Cameroon, it was, all schools had school gardens, but today, I don't know if even 3 or 4 schools have school gardens. So we are bringing back those school gardens into schools to make sure that in the nearest future, we will bring back every other thing that contains art or what scientists have brought into those school milieux in order to empower a better generation. Because this our generation already failed, but we are actually where we are going to fail. So it is time to change the narrative. And changing the narrative means that we must empower, engage the youth, and pass it through the school. I hope I've answered the question.
Thank you so much, Fai. We'll have this as our last question from online, and then we'll go back to the audience. I think a question for David. Hopefully, you're still online as well. There's a question about what if the communities don't want to give their time to inform project design. What solutions have you found to this problem if you've addressed that in engaging the community, and do you have any lessons to share?
Sometimes it's the media to start the conversation. I'll say it that way. Sometimes the community doesn't know that what they are facing is what we would call climate change. They know something different. But I think media provides the platform to not only create awareness and educate the communities on why this is important, but engaging local media also creates a platform where the communities can voice their concerns, and also stakeholders can come in on the platform and just talk about why they want to do this and why this is important for the communities. And also, it amplifies the conversation for, it's a platform to amplify the conversation for communities, because sometimes it's hard to reach communities that are, maybe even marginalized. And so the media provides a platform where they can participate actively. So I think my response would be, even though, not every community would be willing to engage, but that doesn't stop us from, creating the platform to hear why not, and if this is a barrier, how can we address it? So I think the best approach suggestion I'd give for that is, give the platform, have a discussion, let case studies, learn from each other, find out why some are apprehensive and what are the benefits and what are the challenges that they are facing. So I think our biggest resolve would be to use the media, and especially the local media where they talk in local language, to just create that platform where the communities can share their experiences and their concerns, and also as a platform for us as actors to come in and say, why do we want to implement this particular strategy, and what benefit does it have for the communities? And that may give us a better buy-in when we're talking about project design and even project implementation.
Great, thank you so much, David. We have probably time for one more question from the audience. I'm going to go to here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Just coming back to the question around how we increase funding for resilience and anticipatory action, I'm just wondering what you think the role of communications and working with the mainstream media is. I mean, this is the most mediatized COP that there ever has been, and there's, it raises the question as whether or not the sort of resilience community needs to sort of collectively work on a communication strategy that perhaps leverages also its close entwined link with climate change, and that can really explain to decision makers, politicians and the wider public about the importance of resilience and anticipatory action. So yeah, just keen to hear your reflections.
Any takers for that one? Asha?
Try. Asha, go ahead.
Asha, go ahead. I'll complete.
We share the same first name with Dr. Mohammed here. Yes, unfortunately, disasters are very visible, and it makes politicians move, right? DRR beats that purpose, because if you implement DRR, you don't get that visibility. So it has been a challenge, at least I've been in humanitarian side, to somewhat attract a large amount of funding. I mean, there's obviously increased awareness and increased funding over the years. Sendai, for example, Sendai framework brought a lot of attention to disaster risk reduction, and there are a lot of actions going on regarding that and fulfilling that, especially at the national levels. Governments are reporting the Sendai monitor, and they are energized to do that. Of course, like everybody else, we work with the government, and we are constrained, or our budgets are seen with our the government. So the issue is, how can we best use whatever the funds we have to do best outcomes on disaster risk reduction? I'm gonna leave it there.
Very little to add after what my namesake here has said, but maybe just to say, I think when we talk about media and communication, I'm hoping that after this COP, that change and mindset will also begin to happen, because my own experience and using Kenya as an example, even for the media, it will only be important and will make the headline when you say so many people have died because of the drought, or so many animals have died. I mean, I just talked about Kenya having a drought situation at the moment, and every time I do an interview, I'm being asked how many people have died. And I said, one death is one too many. So we don't want anybody to die, but for sure there is enough to talk about in terms of advocating for the resources to be able to prevent these deaths from happening. So I'm hoping that that kind of communication also becomes more the default than the big headlines that are showing people have been affected. So I hope there's been enough conversation here in the COP especially to help change this reactionary communication, that we can be more proactive and understand, yes, there are many other areas that we can promote and help to get the resources, because actually when media communicates, then the partners or the donors start to react. So I think there's a very direct correlation there in terms of that communication, and I really hope that media will become a major partner in this process to help get these resources to where it is needed. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Can I jump in
Thank
for
you.
2 seconds?
Thank you so much. So to close, before I close, I would like to take moderator's privilege to ask one quick question to any of the panel who would like to answer. If you could give us one short message to take away from this session that we definitely kept in our head and took forward in our work, what message would you like to give to us?
I'm going to be brave and go first. I would say local action for global leadership. I'll stop there.
For me, the leadership, authority, and communities necessary together, but not separate. Thank you.
I think we've learned a lot of good lessons, and now let's go act and scale.
Localization, it's been the discussion, the agenda, but I think we have enough reasons just to make that happen.
BJ, and then online.
Mine is local leadership for global impact. Please see our website. That is our strategy. That is through sharing power, shifting to sharing power, where we can together bring the change.
Very quickly, Fi or David, if you're still online, one quick message to us.
Yeah, I think for me it would be passing through schools to get to communities.
Right. For me, it would be communication is aid, and co-production is the best way to deal with development issues, where you bring different partners to work together.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. A massive thanks to our panelists for joining us, for sharing so much experience, recommendations, examples, and thank you very much for joining us here, either in person or online, and wishing you all the best for the last couple of days of COP here. Thank you.